Welcome. I'm Leslie Canham.
I'm Mary Gavoni.
I'm Linda Harvey.
I'm Olivia Wan, and together we are the Compliance Divas.
Welcome to the Compliance Divas podcast. I'm Mary Gavoni. I'll be the moderator for this episode. We bring clarity and simplicity to compliance by navigating the regulatory world to keep you on course. You can subscribe to the Compliance Divas podcast through your favorite podcast channel or on our website, thecompliancedivas.com. Any resources that we mentioned during this episode can be found on the Compliance Divas website. And if you have questions, you can submit them to support@thecompliancedivas.com. We are so thrilled to welcome our dear friend and diva in her own right, Debra Nash, who is going
Is that an age thing?
No, it's
Is that
not.
a nice way of saying she's been around for a long time?
No, it's our best way of saying, Debra, that we love you and we cherish you. And Debra's here today to talk about kind of a sensitive topic, but one that dental professionals need to be aware of, and that is human trafficking. And because we have what is a very intimate, close-up relationship with our patients, we may very well be seeing signs of people who are being trafficked, but not necessarily know it or know what to do. So Debra, start us off today by telling us, how did you get interested in this particular topic? Because it's not exactly a happy one.
And it's not typically in my dental wheelhouse. It was in my personal wheelhouse. I was asked to volunteer to serve refreshments at a course at my church. And the program was called All They Need Is Love. And there were two organizations that were representing the topic of human trafficking. And it was amazing how when I was listening to the two presenters talk about how easy it is for a victim to be taken or to be brought into a human trafficking situation, unbeknownst to them, and next thing they know, they're in it and they can't get out of it. And it touched my heart. It truly touched my heart. So I, of course, asked, there's Justice Ministries Against Human Trafficking. There's a number of organizations, some are local, some are national. So I asked what I could do. And that inspired me to think about, they didn't even mention anything about dentistry, but inspired me to do a little bit more pursuit of, wow, what is going on in the dental industry? So I started doing some research about human trafficking in dentistry and came across some amazing statistics. And I said, wow, I've got to help spread the word. No matter how near or how far, because that is not typically what I'm asked to speak about, because this is an uncomfortable topic, but now a required topic. So it just spoke to my heart that, I just can't imagine harming a human, harming a pet, but I just can't imagine what these young people, and we always think about it that it's typically women, and it is the bulk of the people being trafficked are women. And we think that it's the bulk of it is sex trafficking, but there's also enslavement. And right now we have more slavery in our world than we did during pre-Civil War. We have more slaves now than we did back then.
Oh my goodness. That is frightening. Absolutely frightening.
Yeah. So it could be domestic slavery where I'm brought over under the guise of being a nanny. And now I'm enslaved, and I can't get away. I have no time off. My passport is taken for safekeeping, and now I'm a prisoner. I'm a slave now. So, but by and large, it's typically female, and it's typically sex trafficking. See, like I'm going off on my tangent. A sex trafficker makes more money than a cocaine dealer.
Wow, that's
because a cocaine dealer has one transaction. Once they make the sell, they're done. I mean, until they sell again. But a human trafficker has a product that can be resold many, many times. So they make more money.
Okay. Well, you
So-
mentioned earlier, Deborah, that this is now a requirement. So I think Linda had a question for you related to that.
Good morning, Deborah, and we're so happy
Hi.
that you're here with us today. So, how do dental professionals learn about this? Is it becoming more required in different states? Can you talk to us about how we're creating that awareness within our industry?
Sure. Currently, there are 13 states that require dental professionals to have a course on human trafficking. They're obviously and actually AGD has a certification or a requirement, or they have a course for credits for human trafficking courses. There are a number of, I think, online courses. There Pandas, an associate organization that offers courses. I offer a course. Other people offer courses. And so 13 states require it. I believe it's a minimum of 1 hour. I think it varies state to state in terms of the frequency of having the class. I know that in those states, not only do you have to take the class, but it is required to have a posted sign in the lavatories. Are you a victim of human trafficking, with the 800 human trafficking hotline number? Just like some people who are listening to this podcast may have seen those in airports or in restaurants, and now you're going to be seeing them in dental offices.
Thank you, Deborah. That totally mirrors what we experienced here in Florida about 2 or 3 years ago, when human trafficking law was passed, and we all had to have a mandatory CE, and there is a poster, and it has to be a certain size, and has to have certain information on it. So it's not like you can just go print off something on your 8.5 by 11 from your computer. But the interesting thing was, I think at first, many dental professionals thought that was just for the patients coming in, but it's actually for the employees as well. And you don't think about that in a typical dental setting, because you think of it maybe in other types of industries where we've read about in the newspaper, and we haven't thought about it there. But I've alerted our clients in Florida to be sure they have it in the break room as well.
That's true, because you have no idea. I mean, and sometimes you have no idea that somebody's being domestically abused, but they're coming to work every day and hiding that abuse. So that's a very good point. That's a really good point, Linda.
That's great.
The other interesting statistic is, and it may have been increased since this research, that 25% of victims of human trafficking visited a dentist while they were being trafficked.
And I wouldn't doubt that. So thank you for creating our awareness about the CE courses. Very important, Deborah.
Yeah.
Leslie, lead us into a discussion with Deborah about how do we recognize the signs? What do we look for?
Deborah, yes, that seems so unusual to me. I wouldn't know if someone was trying to send me a signal, or how someone might be trying to hide that they're a victim. What should I be looking for?
That's a great question. And, I actually made myself a couple of notes about that, because there used to be signs that they would have a dot on their palm. Well, once that was learned by the perpetrator, that didn't work. And I know you've seen probably the social media ad about a child learning how to get attention, and then behind their back, they make an indication of that. And that may be appropriate in an outside setting. Couple of things that happen, and there's resources online to get all of them. Typically, the patient, and never assume that the patient's going to be brought in by an opposite gender. The patient can be brought in by someone who looks like a benevolent aunt or a cousin. It's typically somebody who they will tell you that they are a relation, but they're not a parent. They're not a guardian. So when you start asking health history questions, they won't have answers. They will say, I don't know, I'm her aunt. I don't know, I'm her uncle. I don't know, I'm her cousin. So they will be evasive about health history questions. They may not even have a birth date. They may not even know the person's birth date or their age, specific age. So they might have some difficulty completing your health questionnaire. They will also, they do not want to have that person alone with you. They want to go back with them. They want to be with them at all times. I'll tell you an amazing story in one of my clients' offices. It was pretty amazing how she kind of recognized, and what she was a hygienist, and she recognized, you'll see mouth trauma oftentimes, internal mouth trauma. We won't go into the details of that. But you will see, you could often see bruising. You might even detect a tattoo that might say daddy or have a dollar sign on them, which means they've been tattooed by their daddy or their perpetrator. So you might detect some sort of tattoo. They will be obviously the victim will be nervous. They will have a hard time. They will probably keep their head down and they will not give you any eye contact. And when you start asking questions, they're going to turn to the perpetrator to take a look at that. There's going to be inconsistencies in any kind of reporting regarding age, their actual age, and the age. You're gonna see probably malnutrition. You're obviously see active dental. There's going to be active dental disease probably, or there'll be facial trauma. So oftentimes they're brought into the dental practice because they have facial trauma. And a tooth has been knocked out, or they have a infection, and because they're so uncomfortable, they can't work. So they've got to get it taken care of. So it's going to be, the dentistry will probably be, or the need will probably be at an extreme level when they're brought in. They're not going to be having their teeth cleaned. However, they might be brought in for cosmetic and aesthetic dentistry to make them more attractive. So those might see, what are their reasons? The person is going to have some symptoms of post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD. They're also going to startle very easily with movement. They're going to be their posture is going to be weak. They're going to be very withdrawn. They're going to be afraid to speak. So those are some of the signs that you can look at. But as a dental healthcare professional, especially someone who's doing an examination, one of the signs you want to take a look at certainly is facial trauma, mouth trauma, internal mouth injuries. So those are some of them. Yeah.
Wow, Debra, that's really a lot to consider, and really, we should be able to see these signs pretty easily if we're simply made aware of them.
Absolutely, and I think that's why education is so critical. When you start paying attention to what should I be looking for, so you may want to create, as Linda talked about, a poster. You might want to have a checklist somewhere for your team to say, okay, wait a minute, let me go back and let me look at the checklist, or let me look at the guidelines. I think there might be a situation here that we might need to pay attention to. And one of the things, I'll go back to the hygiene story, because I mentioned hygiene and facial trauma. The hygienist suspected, and of course the perpetrator or the person who brought the victim in as a patient did not want to leave the patient alone. And the hygienist, because she had training, said to the patient, she turned to the patient and she said, I think you probably will need to go to the bathroom before we start treatment. And in our office, our protocol is that you must be escorted by an employee only into the restroom. So that will be my responsibility to take you there. And then she gave the information to, then she started asking the patient, are you being held under duress? Is there a situation where I should be seeking help for you? I'm not gonna take this person and take this victim home, and I'm not gonna be the one who says you're a perpetrator and this is a victim. I want to make sure that if I say, do you need help? Would you like me to call the hotline for you? I'm going to call a professional to intervene in this regard. And that's exactly what she did. She called the 1-800 hotline for human trafficking, and they took over from there in the parking lot. So it wasn't a big scene. This is nothing for 2020 or Dateline on television. You want to keep, you want to be respectful, and you want to keep that victim out of harm's way. So you don't want to create any level of suspicion. And so you don't want to accuse the perpetrator and saying, I think this person is here under duress, or I think this person is in your care under duress. So you never confront or approach the perpetrator. That it will not help the victim.
Wow, Deborah, that's great information. And I appreciate the example that you provided for us, because I had some questions on how exactly would a clinician or a dental team member respond. And I think your example really zeroed in on some of the steps to take. Are there any other checklists or steps or approaches that a dental team member would take if they suspect this individual is part of human trafficking?
Well, great question. Once again, there you can probably take a look at, do you have it, especially if it's someone who looks they are of age to have a driver's license. So you might ask, we need some identification. Do you have your driver's license? Do you have some form of identification? I mean, think about this. Don't we need to ask that for all of our patients? Do you have some form of identification? So typically a victim will not have their identification. And then once again, the person bringing them in it may be a perpetrator. It may be someone that the perpetrator hired to bring them in, or a collaborator. And they might say, oh, she's just visiting for a while, or he's just visiting for a while. We really don't have any identification. That should be a sign that they have no identification. I think you ask them, if they're working, say, tell me a little bit about your work. Tell me about your occupation. Tell me about your job. Well, if they just clam up, and if there's a quick change of subject by the person who's bringing them in, because typically you will not be alone with this person, typically. Unless you find a way of letting them know and say, we really need to, the procedures that we're providing, we need to have the person back in an operatory alone, or for HIPAA reasons, or whatever you want to say. So I think that's, the questions. So I think you ask the victim, tell me about your nutrition. Tell me about your diet. Tell me about your sleeping habits. And that could be asked as the healthcare questions, because you're taking a look at, there's a disease or there's a trauma, or tell me about your diet. Tell me about your sleeping conditions. And if they don't have an answer, or if the other person's answering for them, or the other person, if there's a noticeable awkwardness, then you might say, there are probably 12 to 14 questions that you can ask, but I think those would be some of the ones you would take a look at that are safe, but are also suspicious.
I see. Thank you. And so when we have an opportunity to consult with that patient individually and privately, is that when we bring up the 1-800 number?
That's when you would bring up the 1-800 number. And I would say that if an office is still really not clear, then you could turn to a coworker and say, you know what, I think we may have a situation here. Would you call the 1-800 number and explain where we are, what's happening, and have that done off, away from the potential or the suspected victim and the perpetrator. Have someone make that call and say, we think we may have a situation here. Here's what we've discovered. How would you like us to proceed? And the other thing that I always tell the offices that I work with, or in my courses, I say, have the 800 number available to give to the victim. And I don't know, some offices they've actually used that number and said, this is a number to reach us in case of emergency. And they've let the person know. The problem you have is, the dilemma you have is, if I hand the victim a piece of paper with the 1-800 number on it, the perpetrator's probably going to see, what is that? So we have to find a way that that's why the restroom is so important. The other dilemma is that I would ask the suspected victim, do you have a cell phone? I mean, who doesn't have a cell phone right now that they are in control of? And actually, oftentimes they will have a cell phone because that's how the perpetrator will contact the victim. Everybody has, our dental assistant brought her 9-month-old baby girl. I mean, this is sort of a line or no, into the office on Friday to see an emergency patient. She brought her baby in and we'll bounce the baby for you. And the 9-month-old baby had a little baby cell phone. I mean, it wasn't real, but everybody has a cell phone. So, you know, so that would be, so another question might be for the victim, do you have a personal cell phone? In case we need to reach you, what number should we call? And once again, the perpetrator, might say, oh no, you call me and say, well, you know, we have, because this person is, we have some HIPAA compliance. Those are all you people. We have, you know, there's a privacy situation where we actually need to speak, we need to ask specifically some questions to the patient, and not to you. So you can go back to your HIPAA and your OSHA compliance. What can and cannot be shared. And that may be also when you may let the perpetrator step out of the room and say, you know, to be compliant with our Privacy Act, then we need to have you step out of the room while we ask these questions. I mean, it comes down to Privacy Act. My gosh, I was saying we had a little, not a fender bender, but we had a little car accident situation Sunday. Nobody was hurt. Everything's fine. But they no longer on accident reports, they no longer report your birth date or your social security number or anything for privacy. So one of the ways you could have the perpetrator step away is say, we have some privacy questions that we need to ask. And, you know, according to the Privacy Act, that they need to be asked to the patient, not to if the child is, or the victim is of age.
Good points. Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah.
Debra, thank you so much for everything. Did you have another comment that you wanted to?
Well, I was going to say, oftentimes that's when you ask the, speaking to that, if you ask the victim their age, oftentimes these people are smart. I mean, in a bad way, smart. That's always hard. Can you imagine if bad people who think smart badly took those smarts and thought goodly of, you know, I don't even know if that's a word, but they may report that person is 15 or 16 when they're really 18, 19, or 20, because they understand that if they're an adult, they have to have privacy and they have to have protection. So they may lie about their age.
Absolutely. Well, Debra, this has just been so informative, depressing, but informative. But I think it's such an important role that we can play in dental practices to be able to identify any of these issues. For those who do not know the 1-800 number to call, we'll be sure to post that in the resources on our website, thecompliancedivas.com, and other information that we gather from you, Debra, as you've done your research, and we'll put those resources up on our website so that people can access them. Linda, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mary. Debra, if you have the name of some national organizations, you could just mention again. I think that would be helpful for our listeners. So there's some
Sure.
of those spots, 'cause you've touched our hearts, and I'm sure this podcast is going to touch everyone's heart.
Well, Justice Ministries has several chapters. That's the organization to whom I donate and speak for. Panda is another one. If you actually call the 1-800 trafficking line, they will ask you if you're calling because you are in danger, or if you're calling for more information. And you can actually donate. There's private organizations that could certainly use your help. There's the other thing that if people want to do it locally, because I think some people say, I really want to donate to my community, they might want to do some outreach. There are homes. There's a process of how you get someone out of human trafficking, and human trafficking once again could be that I'm being asked to work, and I don't want to be. I'm not going to be real graphic. I could be asked to work in a strip club, and that is trafficking. So I am dropped off at a strip club. I'm required to work in a strip club, and then I'm picked up at the end of my shift. And sometimes once they get out of human trafficking, they have no place to go. Where do they go? Where do they live? What do they do? What skills do they have? Some people have been trafficked from the average age of a victim is 14. 14 is the average age. So let's say I've been trafficked since I was 14 and I finally find my way out. Now what do I do? Where do I go? What skills do I have? Did I go to school? So there are local organizations and local outreaches that will have homes. They will have shelter. They will help the victim get GED. They will, so I would, and most of those are local outreach programs. We have several here in Charlotte that are homes for transitional homes for these victims of human trafficking to get their GED, to get some vocational training, to have a place to live. 1 year, I'll just be brief. 1 year, after I did this training with our team, a group here in Charlotte, they had four, I'm trying to make my 4 look good. They had 4 victims of human trafficking who were pregnant because of their job. And so we did a community project, and we taught them domestic skills, but we also had a baby shower for these women. We found a home. We found childcare for their babies, so they wouldn't have to go back to sex shops or strip clubs or back on the street. Because if you don't provide that and they have no place else to go and they think that's their only hope, that's their only job, then they don't have an alternative. So I really encourage people to look at your community and find out how you could help there. And sometimes you think, oh, this doesn't happen in my town. This happens in a third world country. It happens everywhere. Atlanta is number 8 in the world for human trafficking. Charlotte, unfortunately, is high. Texas, huge high because of the border situation. Easy to bring them over. And the reason is, and when you take a look at, if I live in a city that has an international airport with freeways close by, I can bring someone in and I can get them out very quickly. So don't think that it does not happening in your small town or in your state, and then it's happening somewhere else. It is, and it's happening right here at home.
Frightening thoughts, Debra, but thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us today. We hope that our listeners are motivated to learn more and to do their very best to try to identify who might be victims of human trafficking when they're in their practices. So thank you for listening. This is the ComplianceDivas.com podcast. The resources that we've discussed today will be available on our website, thecompliancedivas.com. If you have any questions or any follow-up thoughts for us, please email us at support@thecompliancedivas.com. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.